Welcome back to AU Family Channel, and thank you so much for being here. It truly means the world to have you as one of our loyal listeners. If our stories have ever touched your heart, we are so grateful that you keep coming back to spend this time with us. So find somewhere comfortable, take a slow, deep breath, and let us begin today's story, together. We invented a game when I was 10 years old, my little sister Josie and I, a silly, elaborate, made-up game involving stuffed animals and imaginary kingdoms that made sense to no one but the two of us, and we played it constantly for years, and then Josie got sick, and even in the hospital, even in her worst days, we kept playing it, and by the end, that ridiculous childhood game had become the most important thing in both our lives, a private world we could escape into together when the real world had become too frightening to bear. Josie was 3 years younger than me, and for most of my childhood, she was simply my little sister, the one who followed me around, who wanted to be included in everything I did, who I sometimes resented for tagging along and sometimes adored for exactly the same reason. The game started, the way these things often do, almost by accident, a rainy afternoon when we were bored and I pulled out some old stuffed animals and started making up a story, and Josie, delighted, jumped in immediately, and by the end of that afternoon, we had built the beginning of an entire imaginary world that would occupy us, in one form or another, for years to come. I do not know how to explain the game to anyone who was not there for its creation, because it made almost no logical sense from the outside, an elaborate mythology involving a kingdom of talking animals, ongoing storylines that shifted and evolved every time we played, characters who had entire complicated histories that existed only in the space between my sister's imagination and mine. We played it constantly, for years, filling notebooks with maps and character histories, spending entire weekends lost in the world we had built together, a private universe that belonged entirely to the two of us. Josie was diagnosed when she was 9, and I was 12, with an illness that changed everything about our family's life overnight, transforming us, in the space of a single devastating doctor's appointment, from an ordinary family into one navigating hospitals and treatments and a fear that settled into every corner of our home and never fully left. I remember the particular terror of watching my parents' faces as the doctor explained what we were facing, and I remember, even in that moment, some instinct in me already reaching for the game, some part of me already understanding that Josie and I were going to need it more than we ever had before. The first time we played the game in the hospital, Josie was exhausted and scared, hooked up to machines in an unfamiliar room, and I remember pulling out a small notebook, one of our game notebooks, and asking her, gently, what our characters had been up to, picking up a storyline we had left off weeks before any of this had started. And I watched something shift in her face, some small flicker of the old Josie emerging through the fear and exhaustion, as she started, haltingly at first and then with growing enthusiasm, to answer, to build, to play, the same way we always had, right there in that frightening hospital room. The game became, over the following months, something far more important than a childhood pastime. It became our escape, the one place Josie and I could go together where the illness did not exist, where she was not a patient in a hospital bed but a character in an adventure, powerful and capable and completely herself. We played it during long treatment sessions, during endless waiting room hours, during the frightening nights when neither of us could sleep. Whenever the real world became too much to bear, we would slip into our imaginary kingdom, together, and for a while, at least, the fear would recede. I want to tell you what the game gave Josie specifically, because I think it mattered in ways that went beyond simple distraction. In that imaginary kingdom, she was never sick. She was strong, capable, often the hero of whatever storyline we were building, facing challenges and overcoming them through cleverness and courage rather than enduring them the way she had to endure her actual illness. I think, looking back, that the game gave her a version of herself that her illness could not touch, a self that remained whole and powerful and entirely her own, even as her actual body grew weaker and more exhausted with every passing month. Our parents watched us play, during those hospital visits, with a particular expression I did not fully understand at the time, something between gratitude and heartbreak, watching their two children retreat into an imaginary world together while the real world grew increasingly frightening around them. I understand now what that expression meant, the relief of watching Josie laugh, actually laugh, in the middle of a hospital stay, paired with the grief of knowing why that escape had become so necessary in the first place. The game evolved during those months, taking on new dimensions that reflected, I think, without either of us fully realizing it, what we were actually going through. New characters emerged who had to face illness within our imaginary kingdom, storylines that mirrored, in fantastical form, the fear and uncertainty we were living through in reality. I do not think we consciously decided to process our fear through the game, but looking back, I can see how the story we were telling each other became a way of understanding, at a safe imaginative distance, the things that were too frightening to talk about directly. There was a particular storyline, one I remember vividly even now, where one of our main characters faced a terrible illness that threatened to take her from the kingdom forever, and the other characters had to go on an elaborate quest to find a cure. We built that storyline together, over several sessions, and I remember, playing it, feeling something shift in the room, some acknowledgement, indirect and safely displaced onto imaginary characters, of the fear we were both actually carrying. Josie's character survived that storyline, found the cure, returned to the kingdom triumphant. I have wondered, since, how much she needed that particular ending, needed to imagine, even through a fictional character, that survival was possible. As Josie's treatment continued, her energy for the game began, gradually, to diminish, along with her energy for everything else, and I remember adapting, without either of us discussing it directly, finding ways to keep the game alive even as she grew more tired, telling longer stretches myself while she simply listened and occasionally contributed a detail or a decision, keeping our imaginary kingdom running even as her physical capacity to actively participate slowly declined. The game did not end because her illness took away her ability to play. It simply changed shape, adapted, the way we adapted to everything else during those difficult years. I remember a particularly hard stretch, when Josie was too exhausted to talk much at all, when I would sit by her hospital bed and simply narrate, quietly, the ongoing adventures of our imaginary kingdom, watching her eyes, unable to tell for certain how much she was absorbing but certain, somehow, that the familiar rhythm of the story mattered to her even in her exhaustion. I kept the game going through those hardest stretches not because I expected active participation but because I believed, and still believe, that the familiar world we had built together offered some comfort even when Josie could do little more than listen. I want to tell you about a moment near the end, a hard one of the last times Josie was lucid and alert enough for real conversation, and I remember she asked me, in a voice that had grown thin and tired, what was going to happen next in our story, wanting to know the next chapter of the kingdom we had built together over all those years. And I remember making up, on the spot, an ending, a good one, our characters triumphant and safe, the imaginary kingdom secured against whatever threat we had last been facing. I do not know if I did the right thing, giving her that ending in that moment. I only know that I wanted, desperately, to give her something whole and complete and good, in a world that was rapidly becoming neither. Josie passed away not long after that conversation, and I want to tell you that the loss of her was the hardest thing I have ever experienced, a grief so large it reshaped the entire architecture of my life, my family, my understanding of the world. But I want to tell you, too, about what happened to the game after she was gone, because it became, in an unexpected way, one of the most important tools I had for surviving her loss. In the weeks after Josie died, I found myself, almost involuntarily, returning to our imaginary kingdom in my own mind, continuing the storylines we had built together, imagining what our characters might be doing now, keeping the world alive even though the person I had built it with was gone. It felt, at first, strange and a little painful, engaging with something so completely tied to Josie without her there to share it. But it also felt, somehow, like a way of keeping her close, of continuing a conversation that her death had interrupted but had not, somehow, fully ended. I started writing down the stories, eventually, months after Josie's death, filling notebooks with the adventures of our imaginary kingdom, continuing storylines we had left unfinished, creating new ones that I imagined she would have loved. I do not know exactly why I started doing this, whether it was grief or love or some combination of both, but I know that it gave me a way to keep talking to my sister, keep building with her, even though she was no longer physically present to build alongside me. I showed my parents some of what I had written, eventually, uncertain how they would react to finding their grieving son filling notebooks with an elaborate fictional world built around their deceased daughter's imagination. And I remember my mother, reading through the pages, crying, but telling me that this was exactly the kind of grief she needed to witness, this proof that Josie's imagination, her spirit, her particular way of seeing and building and playing, was still alive somehow, still shaping the world, even after her actual life had ended. I learned, in the years that followed, that keeping the game alive, in whatever form I could manage, had become an essential part of how I processed my grief for Josie. I could not talk to her anymore, could not hear her actual voice contributing new ideas and plot twists the way she once had. But I could continue the world we had built together, could imagine what she might have wanted, could keep a piece of our shared imagination alive in a way that felt, somehow, like keeping a piece of her alive too. I want to say something about what that game had actually been, in retrospect, beyond simply a childhood pastime that happened to provide comfort during a difficult illness. It was, I have come to understand, a genuine collaborative act of creation between two siblings who loved each other deeply, a world built entirely out of our shared imagination, belonging to no one but the two of us, and it turned out, when the illness came, to be exactly the tool we needed, a place to escape to, a way to process fear at a safe imaginative distance, a source of connection that illness could not fully take away even as it took away so much else. I have thought often, in the years since Josie's death, about how fortunate we were, without ever planning it, to have built that imaginary world together before her illness ever began, to have had, ready and waiting, a refuge we could retreat into when the real world became unbearable. I do not think we could have built something so rich and so meaningful if we had tried to create it specifically as a coping mechanism, in the midst of her diagnosis. It worked precisely because it had started as pure childhood play, years before either of us knew we would need it for something so much larger. My parents told me, years later, that watching Josie and me play that game, during her hospital stays, had been one of the few sources of genuine comfort they had during the entire ordeal of her illness. They said that seeing her laugh, seeing her engaged and animated and completely herself, even for brief stretches, in the middle of an experience that was otherwise almost entirely defined by fear and exhaustion and medical procedure, gave them something to hold on to, proof that Josie was still Josie, still capable of joy and imagination and connection, regardless of what her illness was doing to her body. I continued writing our imaginary kingdom stories for years after Josie's death, filling notebook after notebook, imagining what she might have wanted, keeping the world we had built together alive in whatever form I could manage. I do not do it as often now, the acute need of early grief having gradually softened into something quieter, more settled, but I still, occasionally, find myself imagining what our characters might be doing, still find comfort in the world Josie and I built together, still feel, when I engage with it, a particular closeness to my sister that nothing else quite replicates. I want to tell you about a specific memory that captures, I think, everything the game meant to both of us, a memory from one of Josie's better days during her treatment, when she had enough energy to sit up and actively participate, when we spent an entire afternoon building an elaborate new storyline together, laughing, arguing about plot details, completely absorbed in our imaginary kingdom the way we had been on countless afternoons before her illness ever began. For those few hours, watching her animated and engaged and completely herself, I could almost forget why we were in that hospital room at all. I think Josie could too. I think that forgetting, brief as it was, might have been one of the greatest gifts the game ever gave her. I learned, from that entire experience, about the profound power of shared imagination, of the worlds we build together with the people we love, and how those worlds can become, when we need them most, genuine refuges from realities too frightening to face directly. Josie and I built our kingdom out of pure childhood play, with no idea what it would eventually mean to us, and it turned out to be one of the most important things either of us ever created, a source of comfort and connection and even, in its own strange way, healing, during the hardest years of both our lives. I have carried the game with me into my adult life, not in the literal sense of still actively playing it, but in the deeper sense of understanding what shared imaginative worlds can mean between people who love each other, how they can become refuges, ways of processing fear, ways of remaining connected even through the hardest experiences life presents. I try, now, with my own children, to build similar worlds with them, understanding, in a way I could not have understood before Josie's illness, how important these seemingly frivolous childhood games can actually become. I asked my mother once, years after Josie's death, whether she thought the game had actually helped Josie, in some measurable way, or whether it had simply been a pleasant distraction that made the hard years slightly more bearable without changing anything fundamental about the experience. And my mother said that she believed, watching her daughter during those years, that the game had given Josie something the medical treatment alone could never have provided, a sense of agency, of remaining herself, of continuing to create and imagine and play even as her illness tried to reduce her to nothing more than a patient. That, my mother said, mattered more than any of us fully understood at the time. I think often about the ending I gave Josie, in that last real conversation we had about our game, the triumphant, safe conclusion I improvised on the spot because I wanted to give her something whole and good in a world that was becoming neither. I do not know if that was the right choice, whether I should have been more honest about the uncertainty we were actually facing, but I know that giving her that ending felt, in the moment, like the most important thing I had ever done, a final gift from an older brother to a little sister, built out of the same imagination we had shared for years. I learned, from the entire experience of building and sustaining that game through Josie's illness, about the particular resilience of childhood imagination, its capacity to hold and process experiences too large and frightening to face directly, its ability to provide comfort and connection even in circumstances that seem to leave no room for either. Josie and I built a silly, elaborate, nonsensical world together, and it turned out to be one of the strongest things either of us ever had, strong enough to hold both of us through the hardest years of our lives, strong enough, even, to outlast her. I want to say something about grief and imagination, about how continuing the game after Josie's death became, for me, not an avoidance of grief but a particular way of moving through it, a way of staying connected to my sister that felt more alive, somehow, than simply looking at old photographs or repeating old memories. Building new stories in the world we had created together let me imagine a continued relationship with Josie, a way of asking, still, what she might think, what she might want, keeping her spirit and her particular way of seeing the world alive in the ongoing act of creation, even after her actual life had ended. There is an image I carry from those hospital years, an image of Josie, thin and tired in her hospital bed, her eyes lighting up as I opened one of our game notebooks and asked what our characters had been up to. I return to that image whenever I need to remember what she was actually like, underneath the illness, still herself, still imaginative and engaged and delighted by the world we had built together. That image, more than almost any other memory I have of her, captures who Josie actually was, and I am grateful, beyond words, that our silly childhood game gave me the chance to see her that way, even during her hardest years. I have thought often about what would have happened to those hospital years without the game, whether Josie and I would have found some other way to connect, some other refuge from the fear that defined so much of that period. I do not know. I only know that we had the game, ready and waiting, built years before either of us knew we would need it, and that it gave us something the illness could not fully take away, a private world that belonged entirely to us, a place we could go together when the real world became unbearable, right up until the very end. If there is one thing I want you to take from Josie's and my story, it is the profound importance of the seemingly frivolous worlds we build with the people we love, the childhood games and shared imaginations that can seem, from the outside, like nothing more than pleasant distraction, but that can become, when we need them most, genuine sources of comfort and connection and even healing. Build those worlds with the people you love, while you can, without any specific expectation of what they might someday mean. You may find, as Josie and I found, that they become the most important thing you ever created together. I still write, sometimes, in our old game notebooks, continuing the world Josie and I built together all those years ago, imagining new adventures for characters we created as children, keeping a piece of my sister alive in the ongoing act of creation that we started together on a rainy childhood afternoon. It is not the same as having her here, actually contributing her own ideas, laughing at plot twists I never would have imagined on my own. But it is something, a way of staying connected to her, a way of honoring the world we built together, a way of carrying her forward, imaginatively, into a future she never got to see. I learned, from Josie's entire illness and the game that carried us through it, about the particular power of shared creation between people who love each other, and about how that creation can become, when circumstances demand it, a genuine refuge, a source of agency and comfort in the midst of experiences that otherwise leave us feeling powerless. I try to remember that lesson now, in every relationship I have, understanding how important it is to build these shared imaginative worlds, these private games and stories and traditions, because you never know when they might become the thing that carries you and someone you love through the hardest years of your lives. So this week, I want to ask you to think about the shared worlds you might build with the people you love, the games and stories and traditions that seem, on the surface, like nothing more than pleasant pastimes. Build them anyway. Invest in them anyway. You do not know, building them, what they might someday become, what refuge they might someday provide, what comfort they might someday offer in circumstances you cannot currently imagine. Josie and I built our kingdom on a rainy childhood afternoon, with no idea what it would eventually mean. It carried us through the hardest years of our lives. I hope, whatever world you build, it does the same for you. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. It truly means the world that you are here. If Josie and the imaginary kingdom we built together moved your heart, please give this video a like and subscribe to AU Family Channel, where a brand new story is waiting for you every single week. And remember what a childhood game taught a grieving brother about the power of shared imagination. The worlds we build with the people we love can become, when we need them most, genuine refuges that carry us through even the hardest years. So this week, build something with someone you love. You never know what it might someday mean. I will see you in the next one.